When I walked into the Richmond Foundation Gala wearing my thrift store dress and carrying homemade cookies instead of a fancy bottle of wine, I never imagined that one conversation with a rude guest would change my entire career trajectory in less than 24 hours. But that's exactly what happened when I stood up to Valerie Thornton in front of 300 people, and the host, Catherine Richmond herself, called me her future boss. Let me take you back to how I got there, because this story isn't just about one moment of courage. It's about years of being invisible, being talked down to, and finally reaching that breaking point where you either stand up or you disappear completely. My name is Emma Clark. I'm 42 years old, and up until last month, I worked as an administrative assistant at Richmond Foundation, a nonprofit organization that raises money for arts education in underprivileged schools. I had been there for 11 years. 11 years of arriving early, staying late, remembering everyone's coffee orders, organizing every single event, and watching other people take credit for my work. Catherine Richmond, the founder and CEO, had built this organization from scratch 20 years ago. She was one of those women who seemed to have it all together. Perfect hair, perfect clothes, perfect speeches. She came from old money, the kind of family that had buildings named after them, but she genuinely cared about the cause. The problem was that between Catherine and the actual work, there were layers of management, and most of those layers consisted of people who cared more about networking and climbing the social ladder than about actually helping kids. The worst of them all was Valerie Thornton. Valerie had been on the board for 3 years, and she treated everyone below her tax bracket like we were servants. She was 38, married to a real estate developer, and seemed to believe that her $10,000 annual donation gave her the right to treat staff like garbage. Every meeting, every event, every interaction, Valerie would find a way to make someone feel small. It was her specialty. The annual Gala was the biggest event of the year. We spent 6 months planning it. This year's theme was empowerment through art, and we had secured a beautiful venue at the Grandview Hotel downtown. The event would have 300 guests, all of them donors or potential donors, and the goal was to raise $500,000 in one night. As the administrative assistant, my official role was to help coordinate behind the scenes, but the reality was that I had planned about 80% of this event. I had chosen the venue, negotiated the catering contract, designed the program, coordinated with all the speakers, arranged the silent auction items, and created the seating chart that took me 3 weeks to finalize because everyone had demands about who they would or wouldn't sit with. My boss, Jennifer Hayes, the director of development, had basically handed me the entire project and then disappeared to focus on sucking up to major donors. Every time Catherine asked about the planning progress, Jennifer would take full credit. She would say things like, "My team and I have been working tirelessly," or "I've negotiated some excellent deals with our vendors." Never once did she mention my name. The week before the gala, I worked 80 hours. I was at the office until midnight 3 nights in a row, finalizing details, confirming RSVPs, solving last-minute crises. On Thursday night, the florist called to say they had messed up the order and could only provide half the centerpieces we needed. I spent 4 hours calling every florist in the city until I found one who could fill the gap. On Friday, the keynote speaker canceled because of a family emergency. I had to reach out to our backup speaker, convince him to change his weekend plans, and rewrite the entire program booklet. On Saturday morning, the morning of the gala, the caterer called at 6 a.m. to tell me their delivery truck had broken down. I drove to their kitchen myself, loaded my car with as many appetizer trays as would fit, and made 3 trips to the hotel before 10 a.m. By the time I got home at noon, I was exhausted. I had exactly 4 hours to shower, get dressed, and get back to the hotel. The gala started at 6 p.m., but I needed to be there by 4 p.m. for final checks. Here's the thing about working for a nonprofit when you make $38,000 a year. You don't have money for fancy dresses. All the other women at this event would be wearing designer gowns that cost more than my monthly rent. I had exactly $75 to spend on an outfit. I went to 3 thrift stores before I found a black dress that fit and didn't look completely outdated. It was simple, nothing special, but it was clean and appropriate. For shoes, I wore the same black heels I wore to the office every day. For jewelry, I had my grandmother's pearl necklace. That was it. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I knew I wouldn't blend in with the wealthy donors, but I looked professional. I looked respectable. I looked like someone who worked hard and did their best with what they had. I grabbed the one thing I had been planning to bring for weeks.
Homemade chocolate chip cookies? I know it sounds ridiculous. Everyone else would bring expensive wine or champagne as a gift for the hosts and organizers. But I didn't have money for that. What I did have was my grandmother's cookie recipe and the time I had spent last Sunday baking 6 dozen cookies. I had packed them in a beautiful tin I had decorated myself. It wasn't fancy, but it was made with care. I arrived at the Grandview Hotel at 3:45 p.m. The ballroom looked absolutely perfect. The ivory tablecloths I had chosen were crisp and elegant. The centerpieces were stunning, a combination of white roses and candles that created a warm glow. The silent auction tables were arranged beautifully along the sides of the room. The stage was set with our organization's logo projected on a large screen. Everything I had worked for, everything I had planned was coming together. I checked in with the caterer. Everything was on schedule. I confirmed with the AV team. All the presentations were loaded and ready. I walked through the entire room, adjusting small details, making sure every place card was exactly where it should be. At 5:30 p.m., the board members started arriving. They always came early to mingle with each other before the regular guests arrived. Catherine Richmond walked in looking absolutely stunning in a silver gown that probably cost more than my car. She was surrounded by her usual entourage, board members and major donors, all of them dressed to impress. I saw Jennifer, my boss, wearing a red dress that she had bragged about for weeks. It was a designer piece that cost $2,000. She had mentioned the price to me at least 5 times. Valerie Thornton arrived fashionably late, as always, at 5:45 p.m. She wore a gold dress that shimmered under the lights and carried herself like she was royalty. Her husband followed behind her, looking bored and checking his phone. As the guests began arriving, I stationed myself near the entrance, checking names off the list, directing people to their tables, answering questions. By 6:15 p.m., almost everyone had arrived. The room was filled with the sound of conversation and laughter. I finally allowed myself to relax slightly. Everything was going perfectly. I decided to step into the ballroom and actually see the event I had spent 6 months creating. The lights were dimmed and the candles created a magical atmosphere. The string quartet I had hired was playing softly in the corner. People were browsing the silent auction items and placing bids. At the bar area, there was a table for gifts and greetings. This is where guests could drop off their hostess gifts and sign the guest book. I had set this up myself earlier. I walked over, placed my tin of cookies on the table with a small card that said, "Thank you for your dedication to arts education," and started to walk away. That's when I heard the voice. "Oh my God, are those homemade cookies? Someone actually brought homemade cookies to a gala?" I turned around and saw Valerie Thornton standing there with 2 of her friends, all 3 of them staring at my cookie tin like it was roadkill. She picked up the tin, read my card, and started laughing. "This is absolutely precious. Look at this, ladies. Someone thinks that a few chocolate chip cookies are an appropriate gift for an event like this." Her friends giggled. One of them, a blonde woman in a blue dress, said, "That's so sweet, like a little kid bringing cookies to the teacher." Valerie opened the tin and actually took a cookie out, examining it like it was a science experiment. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure they taste fine, but can you imagine? Everyone else brings Dom Perignon and rare wines, and someone brings cookies they baked in their kitchen. It's like showing up to a black tie wedding in jeans.
Her other friend, a brunette with too much Botox, added, "I wonder who brought them. Probably someone who doesn't usually come to events like this. Someone who doesn't understand how these things work." I stood there, frozen. They hadn't noticed me yet. I was standing about 10 feet away, partially hidden by a decorative column. I could have walked away, I could have pretended I never heard them, I could have let it go, like I had let go of hundreds of other small humiliations over the years. But something inside me snapped. Maybe it was because I was awake for 20 hours. Maybe it was because I had spent 6 months making this event perfect. Maybe it was because I was tired of people like Valerie treating people like me as if we were invisible or incompetent. Maybe it was because those cookies represented my grandmother, who had taught me that the value of a gift isn't in its price, but in the love and care you put into it. Or maybe I was just done being quiet. I walked straight toward them, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Excuse me," I said, my voice clear and steady despite my shaking hands. "I brought those cookies." The three of them turned to look at me, startled. Valerie's expression went from surprise to amusement in about half a second. "Oh," she said with a fake sweet smile, "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean anything by it."
"They're very nice. You didn't mean anything by it," I repeated. "You just stood here mocking a gift that someone brought, calling it inappropriate and comparing it to wearing jeans to a wedding, but you didn't mean anything by it." Valerie's smile tightened. She clearly wasn't used to being challenged. "Look, I was just making a joke. People bring wine to events like this. It's traditional." "And some people bake cookies," I said, "because some people don't have $200 to spend on a bottle of wine. Some people work 2 jobs just to afford a dress to wear tonight. Some people show their appreciation through time and effort instead of money. Those cookies took me 4 hours to make because I used my grandmother's recipe, and I wanted them to be perfect." The blonde friend tried to step in. "I think what Valerie means is that there are certain expectations at formal events." I turned to her. "And I think what I mean is that maybe we should evaluate gifts based on the thought behind them, not the price tag. But what do I know? I'm just the person who planned this entire event." The silence that followed was deafening. Other guests nearby had stopped their conversations and were watching. Valerie's face had gone from amused to angry. "You planned this event?" she said skeptically. "Yes, I did," I replied. "I've spent the last 6 months planning every single detail. I chose this venue, I negotiated with the caterers, I coordinated with the speakers. I arranged every single item in that silent auction. I created the seating chart that took 3 weeks to finalize. I fixed the flower crisis when the original florist messed up. I found a new keynote speaker when ours canceled. I personally drove to the caterer's kitchen this morning when their truck broke down and made 3 trips to bring the appetizers myself. So yes, I planned this event." Valerie looked genuinely shocked. "You're the administrative assistant? Your boss, Jennifer, is the director of development. She's responsible for this event." "My boss takes credit for this event," I corrected. "There's a difference. I do the work, she takes the bows. And that tin of cookies you were just mocking? My grandmother taught me to bake when I was 7 years old. She was a school teacher for 40 years. She never had much money, but she showed love through her baking. When I brought cookies to this event, I was honoring her memory and sharing something meaningful with people who are supposed to care about education. But clearly, I misunderstood what matters here." Valerie's face had turned red. She opened her mouth to say something, but before she could, I heard a voice behind me. "Is there a problem here?" I turned around and my stomach dropped. Catherine Richmond was standing there, looking directly at me. She must have heard at least part of the exchange. Behind her were several other board members, including the board president, Marcus Chen. For a second, I thought I was about to be fired. I had just yelled at one of the biggest donors in front of dozens of guests at the organization's most important event of the year. My career was over. Catherine looked from me to Valerie to the cookie tin that was still in Valerie's hand. She walked forward, took the tin from Valerie, opened it, and took out a cookie. She took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then smiled. "These are delicious," she said, "and I want to know who made them." "I did," I said quietly. "Emma Clark. I work as your administrative assistant." Catherine nodded slowly. "Emma Clark? The same Emma Clark who has been with us for 11 years? The same Emma Clark who I've been told single-handedly saved this event at least 3 times in the past week when things went wrong? The same Emma Clark who arrives before everyone else and leaves after everyone else? That Emma Clark?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. Catherine turned to Valerie. "And you were criticizing her gift?" "It was a misunderstanding," Valerie said quickly, her voice much less confident now. "She brought cookies to a formal gala. I was just surprised by the choice." Catherine took another cookie. "You were mocking her choice. I heard you. You said it was inappropriate, like showing up to a wedding in jeans. You laughed at someone for giving a gift that came from their heart instead of their wallet. At an event for an organization that is supposedly dedicated to making opportunities accessible to everyone, regardless of their economic background, the irony is pretty thick, don't you think?" Valerie looked around for support, but her friends had suddenly found other places to be. "I was just," she started. "You were just being unkind," Catherine interrupted. "You were just demonstrating exactly the kind of elitism that we are supposed to be fighting against. We run a nonprofit that helps kids who don't have resources. We give them access to art programs because we believe that talent and passion matter more than money. And here you are, at our fundraising gala, mocking someone for showing appreciation in the way they could afford to." She turned back to me. "Emma, I need to apologize to you. I had no idea you were the one doing all this work. Jennifer has been reporting to me about the event planning, but she never mentioned your name. I assumed she was the one handling everything." "I was handling it," Jennifer said, appearing suddenly from somewhere in the crowd. "I was overseeing the entire project." "Overseeing?" Catherine repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Emma, is that accurate? Were you assisting Jennifer, or were you running this event yourself?" I hesitated. This was my boss we were talking about. If I told the truth, I might be burning a bridge I couldn't rebuild. But I was so tired of being invisible. "I ran it," I said quietly. "Jennifer gave me the project and told me to handle it. She would check in occasionally, but I made all the decisions, solved all the problems, and did all the work. Jennifer reviewed the final details, but that was it." Catherine looked at Jennifer with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We'll discuss this later," she said coolly. Then she turned back to the crowd that had gathered. "Everyone, if I could have your attention, I want to introduce you to someone. This is Emma Clark. She has worked for Richmond Foundation for 11 years as an administrative assistant. What most of you don't know is that Emma is the reason we're all standing in this beautiful room tonight. She planned this entire event. Every detail you see around you is because of her hard work, her dedication, and her talent. She spent 6 months making sure this night would be perfect for all of us, and she did it while being paid a fraction of what she deserves and receiving none of the credit." People started clapping. I felt my face burning with embarrassment and something else. Pride, maybe? Or relief. "I have been thinking for the past year about restructuring our development department," Catherine continued. "I've felt that something wasn't working, that we were missing opportunities and failing to maximize our potential. Now I understand what the problem has been. We've had talented people doing the work, while other people take the credit and the positions of authority." She looked directly at me. "Emma, starting Monday, you're no longer an administrative assistant. I'm creating a new position, Director of Events and Strategic Planning. The salary is $85,000 a year, plus benefits. You'll report directly to me.
You'll have a team working under you, and you'll have the authority to make the decisions that you've clearly been making anyway. I stood there, unable to process what I was hearing. Did she just offer me a job that more than doubled my salary? Did she just give me a director position in front of 300 people? But that's Jennifer's job, Valerie protested. Not anymore, Catherine said. Jennifer will be transitioning to a different role. As for you, Valerie, I think we need to have a serious conversation about whether your values align with this organization's mission. Your donation is generous, but money doesn't give you the right to demean people. She turned back to me and smiled warmly. Emma, will you accept the position? I looked around at all the faces staring at me. Some were smiling, some looked shocked. Valerie looked like she had been slapped. Jennifer looked pale and furious. But Catherine looked at me with respect, with recognition, with an expression that said, I see you now, and I'm sorry I didn't see you before. Yes, I said, my voice stronger now. Yes, I accept. The room erupted in applause. Catherine shook my hand and then, unexpectedly, pulled me into a hug. Thank you for your service to this organization, she whispered in my ear. And thank you for having the courage to stand up for yourself. You just taught everyone here an important lesson. As she pulled back, she raised her voice so everyone could hear. Ladies and gentlemen, meet your future boss. Because if I've learned anything tonight, it's that the people who really run things are often not the ones with the fancy titles. They're the ones doing the work, showing up every day and caring about getting it right. Now, let's eat, drink, and raise some money for these kids. As the crowd dispersed and people returned to their conversations, I stood there, trying to process what had just happened. My entire life had changed in less than 10 minutes. Several people came up to congratulate me. Some of them were board members I had interacted with before, but who had never really seen me. Others were guests who said they admired my courage. One older woman, a donor named Patricia Hughes, hugged me and said, I've been in nonprofit work for 40 years, and I've seen too many talented women get overlooked while less competent people take the glory. Good for you for speaking up. Eventually, I found myself alone at the gift table again, staring at my tin of cookies. Catherine had taken one, but the rest were still there. I picked up the tin and held it close. Thank you, Grandma, I whispered. Thank you for teaching me that the value of something isn't in what it costs, but in what it means. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I tried to focus on the event, making sure everything continued to run smoothly, but people kept coming up to talk to me. Some wanted to hear the full story. Some wanted to offer their support. Some just wanted to meet the woman who had stood up to Valerie Thornton and walked away with the promotion. The keynote speech was powerful. The silent auction raised more money than we had projected. The dinner was delicious. By every measure, the gala was a massive success. We ended up raising $600,000, beating our goal by $100,000. As the evening wound down and guests started leaving, Catherine found me again. Emma, do you have a moment? Of course, I said. She led me to a quiet corner of the lobby. I want to explain something to you, she said. What happened tonight, me promoting you on the spot like that? It wasn't just because you stood up for yourself, although that was impressive. It was because I realized that I've been failing as a leader. I've been so focused on the big picture, the fundraising, the donors, the publicity, that I lost track of what was happening with my own staff. I've been letting people like Jennifer take credit for work they didn't do. I've been letting people like Valerie treat staff badly because I didn't want to lose their donations. I've been running an organization that's supposed to help underprivileged kids while creating an environment where hardworking people get overlooked because they don't have the right connections or the right background. That ends now. She looked at me seriously. I need you to know that this promotion is real. This isn't just a nice gesture that I'll take back on Monday. Starting this week, we're going to sit down and talk about your vision for our events and development strategy. You're going to have real authority and real resources. And if anyone in this organization has a problem with that, they can come talk to me. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I've worked so hard for so long, feeling invisible. Tonight you saw me. You all saw me. That means everything. Catherine smiled. You made yourself visible. That's the key. You didn't wait for permission. You didn't shrink away when someone criticized you. You stood up and said, "This is who I am, this is what I've done, and I deserve respect." That's leadership. That's exactly what we need. As I drove home that night, still wearing my thrift store dress, still exhausted from 20 hours of being awake, I couldn't stop smiling. My phone had been buzzing all evening with texts and calls. Some were from coworkers congratulating me. Some were from people I barely knew who had heard what happened. My best friend Rachel had texted me 15 times in all caps, demanding to know the full story. But there was one text that stood out. It was from Catherine, sent just before I left. That text said, "By the way, I tried 3 of your cookies. They really are delicious. Your grandmother would be proud, not just of your baking, but of your courage. See you Monday, Director Clark." When I got home, I sat on my couch in my tiny apartment and looked around at my simple life. Nothing had physically changed. I still had the same worn furniture, the same stack of bills on the counter, the same pile of laundry I had been ignoring all week. But everything was different. I had been seen. I had been valued. I had been promoted. But more than that, I had stood up for myself. I had stopped accepting being invisible. I had claimed my worth. The next morning, I woke up to my phone ringing. It was my mother calling from Florida. "Emma," she said as soon as I answered, "your Aunt Carol just called me. Apparently her neighbor's daughter was at some gala last night and told her about a woman who stood up to some rich lady and got promoted on the spot. She said the woman's name was Emma Clark." I thought, that can't be my Emma. My Emma is an administrative assistant. She wouldn't make a scene. But then I thought, maybe it is my Emma, and maybe she finally got tired of being pushed around. So which is it? "It was me, Mom," I said, unable to keep the pride out of my voice. It was me. I spent the next hour telling her the whole story. She laughed, she cried, she told me she was proud of me. "When did you get so brave?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think I've always had it in me. I just needed the right moment. Or maybe the wrong moment. Sometimes you don't find your courage. It finds you." Over the next few days, the story spread. Someone had recorded part of the confrontation on their phone and shared it with friends. It didn't go viral or anything, but within our city's nonprofit community, it became a bit of a legend. People I had never met would stop me at coffee shops to tell me they had heard what happened. On Monday morning, I walked into the office with my head held high. Catherine met me at the door. "Ready for your first day as director?" she asked with a smile. "Ready as I'll ever be," I replied. We spent the morning in her office discussing the restructuring of the development department. Jennifer had resigned over the weekend, sending a terse email saying she felt it was best for her to pursue other opportunities. Catherine had been expecting it. "She's going to tell everyone that she left voluntarily," Catherine said.
And maybe in her mind, she did. But the truth is, I was going to let her go anyway. She wasn't right for this organization, and I should have seen that years ago. We talked about my vision for events, for donor relations, for community engagement. Catherine listened carefully, asked good questions, and took notes. At one point, she looked up and said, "You know, I've been the CEO of this organization for 20 years, and I thought I knew how everything worked. But listening to you talk about these systems and strategies, I realize you understand the operational side better than I do. You've been watching, learning, and thinking about how to do things better, all while people were ignoring you. That's extraordinary." By the end of the day, I had a new office, a new email signature, and a new sense of purpose. I also had a meeting scheduled with the HR director to discuss hiring for my team. On Tuesday, Valerie Thornton sent me an email. It was short and cold. Emma, I want to apologize for any misunderstanding at the gala. I didn't mean to offend you. I hope we can move forward professionally. I stared at the email for a long time before responding. Valerie, thank you for reaching out. I accept your apology. However, I want to be clear about something. What happened at the gala wasn't a misunderstanding. It was you making fun of someone for not having the same financial resources as you. That's not a miscommunication. That's a values issue. I hope that moving forward, you'll think about how your words impact people who are working hard with limited means. Our organization exists to help those exact people, and we can't do that if we mock them. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Valerie never responded, but I heard through the grapevine that she had reduced her donation for the next year. Catherine's response when she heard was simple. Good. We don't need money from people who don't understand our mission. The following Saturday, I went back to my grandmother's house. Well, it wasn't her house anymore. She had passed away 5 years ago, and now my aunt lived there. But I still thought of it as Grandma's house. I needed to bake more cookies, and I wanted to use her kitchen. My aunt was thrilled to see me. She had heard the story from my mother and couldn't stop hugging me. Your grandmother would be so proud, she kept saying. She always knew you were special. She always said you were going to do something important. As I mixed the dough, using the same bowl my grandmother had used for 60 years, I thought about all the lessons she had taught me. She had grown up poor during the Depression. She had worked her whole life for modest wages. She had never had fancy things or taken expensive vacations, but she had been rich in kindness, in generosity, in love. One of her favorite sayings had been, "Baby girl, don't ever let anyone make you feel small. You take up space in this world just like everyone else. You matter just as much as the richest person in the fanciest house. Don't you ever forget that." For years, I had forgotten. I had let people make me feel small. I had shrunk myself to fit into spaces where I wasn't valued. But that night at the gala, I had finally remembered. I had stood up and said, I matter. I take up space. I deserve respect. As the cookies baked, filling the house with that familiar sweet smell, my aunt sat with me at the kitchen table. Tell me something, she said. What made you finally stand up? Why that moment? Why that night? I thought about it for a long time before answering. I think it was because I was tired, I said finally. Not just physically tired, although I was, but tired of being invisible. Tired of working hard and getting no recognition. Tired of watching less qualified people get opportunities I deserved. Tired of being grateful just to have a job, just to be included, just to be tolerated. And seeing those cookies, my grandmother's recipe, being mocked, it felt like they were mocking her, mocking everything she stood for. All the love and care and hard work that goes into making something with your own hands. And I couldn't let that go. My aunt reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your grandmother used to say that sometimes anger is just love with nowhere to go. You loved her. You love your work. You love what you do. And that love finally found its voice. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new role. I hired 2 assistants and a coordinator. I restructured how we planned events. I created new systems for tracking donor relations. I started having regular meetings with Catherine to discuss strategy. But the most meaningful changes were smaller, more personal. I made sure my team took lunch breaks. I made sure they got credit for their work in every meeting, every email, every presentation. I made sure they knew their ideas mattered. I made sure they felt seen. Because I knew what it felt like to be invisible, and I never wanted anyone on my team to feel that way. 3 months after the gala, we had our quarterly board meeting. Catherine asked me to present our upcoming event strategy,
As I stood at the front of the room, looking at all the board members, including Valerie, who was still technically on the board but had become much quieter at meetings, I felt a surge of gratitude. Not gratitude for the promotion or the salary increase, although those were life-changing, but gratitude for that moment of courage, for finding my voice, for standing up, for refusing to be invisible anymore. I ended my presentation with a proposal for a new initiative. I want to create a scholarship program for young people interested in nonprofit work, I said, specifically for young people from working class backgrounds who might not have the connections or resources to break into this field. We talk about making arts accessible to underprivileged kids, but we also need to make career opportunities accessible to them as they grow up. I want this organization to walk the talk. The board approved the proposal unanimously. After the meeting, Patricia Hughes, the older donor who had hugged me at the gala, pulled me aside. "That scholarship program," she said. "I want to fund it. How much do you need?" We talked numbers. She wrote a check on the spot. "And I want it named after someone," she added. "Someone who exemplifies what this program is about. Someone who worked hard, stayed invisible for too long, and finally found her voice. I want it named after your grandmother." "What was her name?" "Helen," I said, my voice catching. "Helen Morrison." "The Helen Morrison Scholarship for Emerging Nonprofit Leaders," Patricia said. "Perfect." I walked out of that building that afternoon feeling like I was floating. Everything had changed. My career, my income, my confidence, my sense of self-worth. All because of one moment where I decided I had had enough of being small. That evening, I went home and called my mother again. "Mom," I said when she answered, "I need Grandma's cookie recipe, the actual written one if you have it. I want to frame it and hang it in my office." My mother laughed. "Emma, I have better than that. I have her entire recipe box. All her cards, written in her handwriting. Do you want me to send it to you?" "Yes," I said, "but I want one more thing. I want you to write down every saying she used to tell us. Every piece of advice, every lesson, because I'm going to teach my team those lessons. I'm going to pass them on." 2 weeks later, a package arrived. Inside was Grandma's old wooden recipe box, worn and stained from decades of use. Inside were hundreds of recipe cards, all in her careful handwriting. But on top was a letter from my mother. "Emma," she had written, "here are some of Grandma Helen's favorite sayings. I wrote down all the ones I could remember. Hard work is never wasted. Someone is always watching, even when you think nobody sees. The best revenge is living well. Never make yourself small to make someone else comfortable. Your worth is not determined by other people's inability to see it. Stand up straight and take up space. You belong here just as much as anyone. The quality of your character matters more than the size of your bank account. Real class is how you treat people who can do nothing for you." And my personal favorite, the one she told me when I was struggling, "Baby, sometimes you have to get loud to be heard, and that's okay. Don't apologize for having a voice." I sat at my desk in my new office, reading and rereading those sayings. Then I did exactly what I had planned. I had the cookie recipe and the list of sayings professionally framed. I hung them on the wall behind my desk, where I would see them every day, and where anyone who came into my office would see them too. A reminder, a legacy, a promise to never let myself be invisible again. Now, 6 months after that gala, I want to tell you what happened to everyone involved in this story. Catherine and I meet weekly. She's become not just my boss, but my mentor. She's teaching me about nonprofit leadership, about fundraising strategy, about how to navigate the wealthy donor world without compromising your values. She tells me often that promoting me was one of the best decisions she ever made. Jennifer landed at another nonprofit across town. I heard she's doing fine, but she's not in a leadership role anymore. She's back to being a senior coordinator, which is probably more her speed. Valerie quit the board after 6 months. She sent an email saying she wanted to focus on other philanthropic interests, but everyone knew she left because she couldn't handle the shift in culture. Catherine had made it clear that donations didn't buy the right to treat people badly, and Valerie didn't like being held accountable. The scholarship program launched last month. We have 15 applicants for 3 spots. Reading their essays, seeing their passion and their hunger for opportunities makes me cry every single time. These kids remind me of myself, smart, hardworking, full of ideas, but lacking the connections and resources that would make their path easier. My team has grown to 6 people. We're planning not just our annual gala, but quarterly events, community engagement programs, and a new speaker series.
My assistants, Sarah and James, are both incredibly talented. I make sure they know it. I make sure they get credit. I make sure they're paid fairly. As for me, I moved to a better apartment. I have a car that doesn't break down every other month. I can afford to buy new clothes instead of shopping at thrift stores. Not that I've stopped thrifting. I actually love it. But now it's a choice, not a necessity. I started dating someone I met at a nonprofit networking event. He's a program director at a youth organization. He's kind, he's funny, and when I told him my story, he didn't minimize it or make it about himself. He just said, "I'm glad you know your worth now." And I do. I know my worth. Not because Catherine gave me a promotion, not because I make more money, not because people know my name now. I knew my worth when I stood up at that gala and said, "I matter." The promotion was just the world finally catching up to what I already knew. Last weekend, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership conference. They wanted me to talk about finding your voice in male-dominated fields. But I corrected them. This isn't about male versus female, I said. This is about power dynamics. It's about how organizations treat people they think have less power. It's about how easy it is to overlook someone who's quiet and hardworking in favor of someone who's loud and connected. It's about how we equate wealth with worth and confidence with competence. My speech was about the invisible workers, the assistants who run everything while managers take credit, the coordinators who solve every problem while directors get the promotions, the people who arrive early and stay late while others network their way up the ladder. I told my story. I told them about the cookies, about Valerie, about standing up, about everything that happened after. When I finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Women lined up afterward to tell me their own stories. So many stories of being overlooked, undervalued, underpaid. So many stories of doing the real work while someone else got the real credit. One woman, probably in her 50s, grabbed both my hands and said, "I've been an executive assistant for 30 years. I basically run a company of 200 people, but my boss gets all the recognition. I've never said anything because I thought that's just how it works. But hearing your story, I realize I've been making myself invisible. I'm going to stop. I'm going to ask for what I deserve." "Good," I told her. "You should. You deserve it." Another woman, younger, maybe late 20s, said, "I've been planning my organization's biggest fundraiser for 2 years. My boss keeps putting her name on everything. I was going to let it go because I didn't want to cause problems, but I'm going to speak up now. I'm going to make sure people know what I did." "Do it," I encouraged her. "Don't wait as long as I did." As I left that conference, I thought about how one moment of courage had rippled out into something bigger. My story had given other women permission to stand up for themselves, and those women would inspire others, and those others would inspire more. Change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small moments, in one woman at one event deciding she's had enough of being invisible, in one person saying, "I matter. I deserve respect, and I won't be quiet anymore." That's how things change. That's how we build a world where hard work is recognized, where talent is valued over connections, where you don't have to be wealthy or well-connected to be seen and heard and respected. It starts with one person standing up, and sometimes that person is standing up over a tin of homemade cookies. Last weekend, I organized a small gathering at my apartment, just my team from work, a few friends, and my mother, who flew in from Florida for a long visit. I baked cookies using Grandma Helen's recipe. Everyone raved about them.
My mom told stories about Grandma, about her strength and her wisdom and her kindness. Sarah, one of my assistants, said, "I understand now why you stood up for these cookies. They're not just cookies. They're family, their history, their love." "Exactly," I said. "That's exactly it." As people were leaving, my mom pulled me aside. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you," she said for probably the 100th time. "But it's not just about standing up to that awful woman at the gala. It's about what you're doing now, how you're treating your team, how you're making sure other people don't feel invisible, how you're passing on her lessons. That's her real legacy." That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on my couch with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had changed in 6 months. I had a career I loved, a team that respected me, a boss who valued me, financial security, confidence, a sense of purpose. But the most important thing I had gained was something harder to define. I had gained myself back. For years, I had been shrinking, making myself smaller, quieter, less demanding, accepting less than I deserved, believing that's just how things worked for people like me, people without money or connections or the right background. With that night at the gala, I stopped shrinking. I expanded. I took up space. I used my voice. And I discovered that I had more power than I ever imagined. Not power over other people, but power over my own life. The power to say, "This is not acceptable." The power to say, "I deserve better." The power to say, "I matter." And that power has changed everything. So if you're reading this, if you're listening to this story, and you see yourself in my situation, if you're working hard and being overlooked, if you're doing the real work while someone else takes the credit, if you're making yourself small to make other people comfortable, if you're tired of being invisible, let me tell you what I learned. Your worth is not determined by other people's failure to recognize it. You don't need permission to stand up for yourself. You don't need to wait for the perfect moment. Sometimes the perfect moment finds you, and you just have to be brave enough to seize it. Will there be consequences? Maybe. I could have been fired that night. Standing up to Valerie could have ended my career instead of launching it. But here's what I realized. The consequences of staying silent were worse than the consequences of speaking up. Because staying silent meant staying invisible. It meant accepting that my work didn't matter, that my time didn't matter, that I didn't matter, and I couldn't do that anymore. So I took the risk, and it paid off. But even if it hadn't, even if Catherine had sided with Valerie and I had lost my job, I would have gained something more important. I would have gained my self-respect. I would have known that I stood up for myself, that I didn't let someone diminish me without consequences, that I valued myself even if nobody else did. And that's worth more than any job. Today is exactly 1 year since that gala. Catherine organized a small celebration in the office, just the development team and a few board members. She made a speech about transformation and courage. She talked about how the organization has changed over the past year, how we've become more intentional about valuing our staff, about creating a culture of recognition and respect. She ended by raising a glass to me. "To Emma," she said, "who taught us all that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to stay invisible, who showed us that real leadership isn't about titles or salaries. It's about doing the work and standing up for what's right, and who brought us the best cookies we've ever had to a gala." Everyone laughed and applauded. But the moment that meant the most came after, when Catherine pulled me aside. "Emma," she said quietly, "I want you to know something. In my 20 years running this organization, I've made a lot of mistakes. I've overlooked talented people. I've let the wrong people have too much power. I've prioritized donations over values. What happened at that gala, you standing up the way you did, it was a wake-up call. Not just about you, but about everything. You changed this organization. You changed me. And I will always be grateful." "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me, for hearing me, for believing in me." She smiled. You made yourself impossible to ignore. That's a gift. As I walked home that evening, past the park where I sometimes sit to think, past the coffee shop where I've become a regular, past all the familiar landmarks of my new, better life, I thought about that moment 1 year ago. Standing in that ballroom, heart pounding, voice shaking, refusing to let someone mock something I cared about. That moment changed my life, but more than that, it revealed my life. It revealed who I had always been underneath all the shrinking and silence. Someone strong, someone brave, someone who knew her worth and was willing to fight for it. That person had always been there. She was just waiting for her moment. And when that moment came, when Valerie Thornton picked up that tin of cookies and started to laugh, that person stepped forward and said, "Enough." Enough being invisible, enough being undervalued, enough making myself small. Enough. And everything changed. Not because the world suddenly became fair, not because people suddenly started valuing hard work over connections, but because I changed. I stopped waiting for other people to see my worth. I showed them. I stopped hoping for opportunities. I created them. I stopped being grateful just to be included. I demanded respect. That's the real secret, the real lesson, the real truth that I want to share with anyone who feels invisible right now. You have more power than you think. You are more valuable than you know. You deserve more than you're accepting. And the moment you decide to stop being invisible, the moment you stand up and say, "I matter," everything changes. It might not change in the exact way you expect. You might not get a promotion on the spot like I did. You might not get a fairy tale ending. But you will get something more important. You will get yourself back. You'll remember who you are when nobody's watching, who you are when nobody's giving you credit, who you are when all you have is your own sense of worth. And that person, that invisible worker who's been doing the real work all along, that person is powerful. That person is valuable. That person deserves to be seen. So stand up, speak up, take up space, refuse to be invisible. Bring your cookies to the gala. And if anyone laughs, stand up and tell them exactly what those cookies mean. Because you matter. Your work matters. Your voice matters. And it's time the world knew it. 1 year ago, I was an administrative assistant making $38,000 a year, wearing a thrift store dress, and bringing homemade cookies to a gala where I didn't think anyone would notice me. Today, I'm a director making $85,000 a year, mentoring a team of talented people and running programs that will change lives. All because I stood up for a tin of cookies. All because I refused to stay invisible. All because I finally believed what my grandmother had been telling me my whole life. You matter, baby girl. You take up space in this world. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small. I don't feel small anymore, and I never will again.